wow, that audience engagement. And I can't make any promises about it improving, but I had to come back to talk about the new South Park DLC. Nearly 6 months later, let me just say for the record, this game is still fucking awesome. There are definitely better ones to come out in the last 12 months, artistically and mechanically, but the fact I was compelled to come back at all says something, given how shot my attention span and patience have been lately. I even mopped up all the post-game content I missed before touching the DLC, but not for nothing did I pick now of all times to pick Fractured But Whole up again either. So let's see what Ubisoft San Francisco have been up to in the meantime, besides having way better DLC than Harmonix right now. The Season Pass launched with the usual costumes and trinkets because even though this is a different branch of Ubisoft, it's still Ubisoft. I don't know, here's a list of what it gets you. The first piece of actual DLC released was the Danger Deck. Haha, I get it. But I opted to leave that until the end given the promise of new classes and powers in the actual new story content. So let's take a trip to Casa Bonita and see what—
I need your help. Vampires have taken my sister Karen. We have to save her.
But she's fine. She's literally at home. She asked me to find her doll. Whatever, this game's ending is already based on a time paradox. So the story goes that Kenny's sister Karen is under the spell of the lame emo kids, and you have to go to the Mexican restaurant Casa Bonita and rescue her before she is converted to being a fake goth with no style. Which seems like kind of a weird request given the costume I started with, but okay. Right away from the first battle, I was able to pick everything back up right away, and I was immediately reminded of what compelled me to this game to start with. Children making fake factions and superhero aliases, and fighting each other over something smaller than they're making it is just really nostalgic, you know? And again, when you throw in South Park and all its South Parkisms, it blows up to a hilarious degree. It's a really grave quest with dire consequences for failure, about dragging a girl away from trying to make new friends just because your friends think they're uncool. But this is also where From Dusk Till Casa Bonita falters, because the joke of the premise is paper thin, which is that fake emo kids are dorks compared to real goths who are a different kind of dork, and Twilight is lame. As the first Twilight movie is now a full decade old, I don't consider this salient commentary. There's still some funny moments of dissonance between your rivals and Henrietta, their new playable partner. They do squeeze a lot of puns in there, but the cleverness is only on a micro level. The big picture is just kind of tired. Until they weigh Twilight up directly against Lost Boys, and remind everyone that vampire movies have always had quirky low points, and it becomes funny again. And then Michael Jackson, who is Corey Haim actually, apparently, bursts through as the final boss. I don't get it. Okay, so the story and theming are as erratic as any late-era episode of the show, but what do you actually get to do at Casa Bonita?
They have like cliff jumpers and Black Bart's cave and all kinds of stuff. There's this one part where you can dress up in old western clothes and get your photo taken in a fake jail.
Yeah, okay, besides that. Well, at its base level, it's another 5 odd hours of the turn-based combat, environmental puzzle solving, and ridiculous vistas and in-jokes that were in the original game. Henrietta makes for a decent ally in combat with one of the better general ultimate abilities, hurting all enemies and healing all allies at once, and she comes packed with a new mechanic. A lifesteal status effect that drains the health of surrounding enemies at the end of a turn. Surprisingly potent stuff, and maybe the best purely support character with the range she actually gets to use her heals and buffs. But the big new addition is a new class for the new kid. The Necrolord. The regular abilities are fine, lots of damage, lots of utility, but its ultimate ability supercharges these moves to a probably overpowered level, and because it's for a full 3 turns, I usually got to pop it off again immediately after it wore off. It doesn't stop the final boss from being tricky, but it does make short work of pretty much everything else the game can throw at you. And that's in total, because a lot of unlocks carry over to the regular game, apparently even repeat playthroughs on new save files. You also get a few new health items and artifacts. Overall, it does actively build on the base mechanics of the game, which is always nice to see in a strategy expansion. But aside from some tacked on Final Fantasy X style minigames for extra rewards at the arcade, there's nothing here that reinvents the wheel or changes the dynamic of what Fractured But Whole is all about. For something closer to that, we'll have to go to Well, the DLC is called Bring the Crunch, but I can't really say the location name, even though it took me a while to get it because I'm clueless. Anyway, Jimmy invites you over to his summer camp, and you have to investigate a bunch of murder scenes while trying to rescue what counselors are still alive. While Casa Bonita was a jab at emo culture, Bring the Crunch is a full send-up of schlocky horror tropes, and honestly the atmosphere is actually pretty tight, considering this is South Park we're talking about. It's gory, it's dark, Jimmy doesn't understand that people are literally dying, the monsters are all terrifying and quite difficult to kill, but they're actually just crack addicts hired by one of the kids trying to stop camp so he doesn't have to do inane activities with Jimmy anymore. It's a lot closer to the undermining wit of the series as a whole, and even though it has to toe a few lines of good taste to get there, the humour is well past that of the fairly passive Casa Bonita, the very ending especially, which is another hilarious smash cut to the credits. The camp itself is also just more fun to explore. An optional side quest alongside the main story is collecting merit badges, which you get through a few side activities like fishing, crafting, and delaying the souls of the deceased to rest by taking selfies with them. Despite this, it actually takes less time to get through everything, and again, although the final boss is a pain, I actually never died outside of some environmental puzzles. And the actual additions to the combat this time around are a lot more dubious. Something both pieces of DLC do is completely inhibit your party lineup. You're stuck with what the story gives you, unlike in the main game. On the one hand, these forced lineups get you to understand the utility of everyone. On the other hand, it can make things a bit tedious and inflexible, and there's no party member who feels more inorganic than Mint Berry Crunch, who adds a whole suite of status effects just to make his gimmick work. You can inflict berry status on enemies and mint status on friends, and if a buried enemy attacks a minted up friend, it'll deal no damage. But outside of his ult, it's actually very hard to consistently pop it off so everyone you want is affected at the same time. A lot of the time I had a minted up party without buried enemies, so it did nothing. The new class fares a lot better, although its name was incredibly confusing until I heard what it was about. The Final Girl also offers a new status effect, but it's more an extension of the bleeding effect that's already in the game, and their kit is just a lot easier to understand. The Final Girl can set up saw traps that cover a large area for 3 rounds, and has an attack where you can set it up, move again, detonate a bomb, and control the knockback in any direction you want. It adds a nice keep away strategy to the game, funneling enemies into hazards, but the enemies here are also designed with a lot of pull abilities to nullify this setup, which is what the close quarters toolkits of Fast and Professor Chaos are meant to weigh up against. There's even a battle here where you can't kill enemies on certain tiles or they'll just come back to life, so you have to use traps and knockback intelligently. It's these kinds of battles where you can best see the layers that made Fractured so much more than the dumb, stiff Paper Mario clone of Stick of Truth. Again, pretty much everything you unlock here goes right back into the main game when you're done, and there's no better place to see how the overall combat looks with these additions than in the Danger Deck. 5 groups of 3 challenges against various matching and mismatching enemies and bosses, with plenty of loot to earn along the way. And as much as I like the combat, and I do think it does a lot to remain involving even at its low points, I have also always maintained that it ain't XCOM, and it's about here where the complexity of the mechanics dries up. Perhaps it was a mistake to visit the first piece of DLC last, but I specifically wanted to see how far you could take the combat when you have every tool at your disposal against what should be the biggest challenge of them all. But I was able to rely on pretty much one strategy for the first lot of the Danger Deck. If you get all the merit badges at summer camp, you can unlock an artifact which gives a huge boost to your ultimate meter if you can block an attack without taking damage. And including the new kit, you can have 3 characters at a time that can do just that. So you'll be able to pop through ult abilities like a pre-nerf Mercy. Which nerf are you talking about? While enemies slowly kill themselves with status effects and traps while doing negligible damage to you. And although this is in the base game, there's also a ridiculously OP ability where you can interrupt an enemy's turn and summon a clone of the new kid. Combined with the Necrolord ult, you can basically have 5 characters on the field at once. Which is a shame, because the challenges within the deck itself are pretty well set up, including the ultra modifiers forced upon you when repeating fights. For example, One of the fights tasks you with killing a bunch of summoners, with the threatened enemy count spiraling out of control, and the ultra modifier for this fight is that when you kill someone, every other enemy gets more health and attack power. You see how a fight like this can become way harder, right? But there's also an inherent limitation to the training room that really inhibits its potential for difficulty, and it's actually staring at you in plain sight. I only learned this after the fact, but apparently Diabolic difficulty, the hardest, was added post-launch with the Danger Deck DLC, but even then the Danger Deck only goes up to Mastermind, the second highest difficulty. This explains a lot about the experience, because while there were plenty of fights in the main game I got stuck on for ages, though there were tricky ones in this DLC, I still got everything first try, even when I completely screwed up my loadout. The turtling strategies are a lot less effective against enemies immune to chill and rage, but even failing to account for this, I never lost a fight. There is a kind of catharsis to this, having limped my way through the first Civil War fight and thrashing everyone the second and third times, but even so it's a tad disappointing that the difficulty curve stops well before the optional Arena DLC. Maybe if they'd really cranked it up, the second stage Morgan Freeman fight could have been something spectacular. Another minor issue is that while the friendly banter is still good, you can expect repeats by this point, especially since the holograms you fight don't talk at all. But don't let all my criticisms fool you. I still had a blast coming back to South Park, enough so that my playtime apparently doubled. They really do a lot to try and make every little moment count, every stat affect another, every decision motivate another. I can't say I was ever bored, except for when I was wandering around just trying to get from one side of town to another. Though I'm keeping my distance from the show, I'd love to play more of these if they come out. Hell, we might end up getting some Canada DLC after all. Though I'm fairly certain Bring the Crunch was the last DLC announced for the Season Pass. All up, between the base game, the DLC, and the Stick of Truth pack-in, the Fractured But Whole Ultimate Edition whatever makes for a great total package. If you can find it discounted, I'd say just go for it. And that's about all I have to say.